capitalism, all of the gains in automation, it goes to the owner class. All you have to do is have everyone be an owner, and now suddenly any gain in automation is a gain for everybody. If you grow just one thing, it may not grow as well as if it grows with another thing. A good example of that is called the Three Sisters method of farming.
There is definitely multi-apartment buildings or multi-families that do passive design.
$100 million that they gave to Joe Rogan that they would kind of be out if they breach contract. Is that a bigger number, or is 2 billion a bigger number?
I don't know,
It's a
Zach.
tough one. I
It's
know,
really hard.
and maybe
Yes.
comparing numbers is not Jeremy Strong's. Gotta go kill a Jenny.
I still don't think you should kill her. I don't think it's a good idea.
It's a ghost, dude. All right, welcome everybody back to Bread Theory. I'm your host Zach, and joining me at our new time, it's going to be Tuesdays now, is Dan Platt of the Albany Greens, and he has some videos to show us tonight on library socialism. How you doing tonight, Dan?
Oh, I'm good. Got a little anxiety, which solved by doing things for other people. At least one psychologist put it. Um, I've got a lot on my plate, or it's growing, multiplying. Though sometimes I get a reprieve when a friend has health issues, which is what happened last week with my music partner.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gaining a few partners for things, whether it's tennis, music, technically politics, but not quite. It doesn't feel like a partnership yet. It's still more of like a guy who's my superior, and but technically we've traded roles for the local chapter, where I'm the chair this time. But he's the co-chair of the state party,
Gotcha.
but he's on the far end of town as well.
Ah.
But we'll see how things shake out this year. If more people actually help, or if
I sure hope so.
get people activated. We've got Jill Stein coming to Albany. She's bumping around New York because of a petition season starting here, and it's going to be the big hurdle for ballot access. She says in interviews she's 80% the way.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose we're the remaining 20% of work. There's a danger in us, and there not being enough ballot access companies, people you hire to do petitioning, because RFK is going to hire them all out. There's a danger
Oh no!
because they have
I
millions
can't
of
believe that
dollars.
dude is still going. What's the point?
Yeah, I well, they see themselves apparently. So it depends on which kind of organizer for his campaign you ask. I think the ones that are Trump fans see him as taking Biden votes, and there are Dems there that see him as taking Trump votes.
Yeah,
So
I
I think that's this coalition of polling. Isn't he polling 20%? Still, like it's high.
is it really that high still?
Um,
Boy, I
in
have to
some
look that up.
polls, but obviously
Yeah.
polling
No place.
it should be taken with much skepticism. But it's certainly like a way more of a Perot figure in this case. Like he's definitely
Yes.
probably appealing to that set of voters, the disaffected but very much wedded to the status quo and centrist.
But then also
Uh,
really big on like
but
anti-vax conspiracies. Like, who are these people that he's attracting?
the normie, I mean,
Yeah.
Democratic Party normies. I mean, look, I could go into my charts of the Pew political categories that they made, and like what do the RFK voters fit into? Because lately there's fewer non-party oriented groups. It is more partisan, and so you have a bunch of people in the middle, so to speak, who don't like this partisanship and so want someone who's just actually, they see Biden as being representing an extreme deviation, or that just Democrats in general are shifting too far. So just a just quick analysis, I guess, is They're disaffected centrists, or usually maybe on the sidelines, and haven't voted for a Dem since Clinton, or by Clinton I mean Bill Clinton.
Right.
I don't know. I think maybe we could put that up as one of our videos we watch. Focus group with RFK voters. Let's I'll look one up.
Yeah.
While you play.
Oh, okay. Yep, we can get into the library of socialism. Did you want to do an intro to what library of socialism is before we?
Yeah. So the main concepts is to intensify what libraries already are, which is a place of an alternative, non-capitalist social relations. I think the leader off the cuff, but maybe publicly, says the president of the Library Association is a socialist and says like it should be a place of socialist organizing. Because of that social relationship. And so the main three tenets of library socialism or concepts, which are mostly driven from Bookchin and communalism, or municipalism, starting on the local institution level, like libraries are a local. There's no national library system. There could be, but there isn't. But basically, you have something called use struct, which is like use and fruit that you use.
Oh, use fruit. Yeah.
Yeah. There's I'll forget the names. There's a concept that like library should be a library of things. It's a form of permanent, semi-permanent ownership. That ownership is like when people think of owning things properly. Let's say in legal terms as well as expectation, you're responsible for that property. Right. If the tree falls down, it was your responsibility. If the grass is too tall, it's your responsibility. You're responsible for the property when you own property. At the same time, in capitalist logic, you are, and I guess that responsibility is actually supposed to be a safeguard against this other type, which is when you own something, you have the freedom to destroy it.
Sure.
But that is not the case if there is a commons and property is part of a commons. So it's a sort of way of putting private property or even personal goods, but putting them into a context where they count as the commons, but they are available to individuals as a library. So a library of things, having different libraries, tool libraries, household good libraries, art libraries, libraries of everything. Furniture in particular, and that's where the ownership, the borrowing becomes something that's more semi-permanent, where instead of 2 weeks, you are taking something out for 2 years, and you renew it for every 2 years that you have it, and you're responsible for any damage that occurs to it. Or it's like, but then I think there are certain objections, like there's certain things you expect to fall apart and need maintenance, or that as it's used by somebody, it's going to degrade and it's not worth returning. But this is where we get into, if things are in the commons, if something's in the library of things, it's going to be something that has to be more durable. It has to be something that's reusable, so that when you return it, hey, maybe it's just a matter, could be fixed up or recycled. So anyway, the use fruct term which is like part 2, the number 2 thing, is that people can take out something and they get the benefits from using it. That ownership is based on possession, and it's through that we can say possession, borrowing. As long as you're using it, you don't have to return it. You just have to signify that you're using it, I guess. With renewal or something like that.
Sure.
But particularly, and then there's complementarity is the third thing, which is that you have all these civic and social uses that are complementary to each other. Storing and borrowing books is complemented by having a computer lab with internet access. It used to be that in the 90s you had internet cafes where you had to pay to use the internet. Now the internet cafe is a part of the library. if your library invested in such things. Printing services, maker spaces. We have a small maker space in one of our libraries. It's only open once a week for like kid classes, so I don't like it. It's not something I could go and fix something or try something out.
Sure.
Or there, I don't know. I need to put the time into going to one of the classes for adults if there are, though they exist. But I'm not used to just using a 3D. I mean, my roommate used the 3D printer there actually, so he did make use of it. But he just made some small little items, so it's like this doesn't speak to the third industrial revolution that is 3D printing is meant to usher in.
Sure.
But like health services, housing services, because one of the issues my library system faces is the subalterns, which is the academic word for underclass people.
Oh man, I've never even heard that. Subaltern.
Yeah, I just read it.
That just sounds insidious.
Oh, you think it sounds? It's still
subaltern. Like it's got to start. It's leading off with sub.
Yeah, but it's meant to invoke. Well, yeah, there's the feeling of a word, but its meaning is certainly better than underclass, which is those who are oppressed by, majority, of normal people. But I don't know. I'm just gonna try it out because underclass is underclass, like this class it's under. Obviously, lumpenproll is pretty negative, but that's Marx's term for it.
A lot of it does invoke hierarchy. That's true.
It's hard. It's really hard to talk about the totally disenfranchised, the most bottom of our society, without bringing a hierarchy into it, because you have to say objectively, how are these people in trouble?
Right.
Stop.
I think it is a recognition of their status, not a judgment of their character.
Yeah. I mean, they are free to use the library, but some of them are going to have a mental health crisis, or they haven't had a shower in 3 days. And so they're stinking up the place. And this is a library, but a complementary purpose would be to have a full service bathroom.
Yeah, right.
Or a shower area. The athletic center will have that, but that's going to be in one part of town. And maybe, well, it's hard to know if they'd be turned away from there. You have to be there for an athletic program, or you got to be running the track to use the shower room. But we really do need some kind of public shower room. But
absolutely,
for the people who are living out of their car.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So, but then also have the housing services, so that's like if you're going to be allowed to be here and not get kicked out for loitering, because even though it's like we had a change of leadership in our library system, and I'm being warned that like where the last one saw the library as like a public amenity to be open and accessible as much as possible, the other one has a priority of let's put down some boundaries of use so the staff aren't run ragged. Because some of them are not paid 6 figures. The clerk 1 position is $30,000, which is,
Yeah, I mean, I think it would make
still
more sense.
sort of.
I think it would make more sense too, just to have a couple of social workers stationed there, to deal with the difficult.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I think her priority is just that as long as it's during library hours. There are too many things that were like going late.
Oh, okay.
And this was overtime for the security.
I see. Uh-oh. Call has frozen. That's bizarre, isn't it? Ooh, okay.
It said my crashed. Am I on?
Yeah, let me yeah, I got you. I had you in 2 places at once, so let me just remove the other one. Okay. So we should be good to go again.
Yeah. So it ties into a bunch of other communalist and municipalist platforms, I suppose, but it's just this concept of the library is cool because it's a post-capitalist social relationship. it's a public amenity that's buying a commodity, the books. And so if it can do it for books, it can do it for camping equipment. It can do it for power tools. It can do it for deep fryers and things that a household will only use twice. So it cuts down on waste. It cuts down on inefficiencies. And it can be complemented with classes for how to use these things properly. It can have commercial kitchens. And these would be major expansions or whole new buildings for libraries. See how things could work out long term. Here in Albany, we have a educational center with a teaching commercial kitchen and classrooms and things like that. But the issue was who would be running it? Who would be doing these classes? The county BOCES, our area BOCES, which is like adult education, is governed on the state level, is doing it. But they are a shit show. I mean, and it's not. I'm not just crazy. I met someone who worked in there and ping pongs around the county, and she said, "Oh yeah, they are a complete mess." In terms of I wanted to take a carpentry class, and I was just emailing them for how to even register for it, and they didn't have clear answers for me. And when they said well, how do I even pay, right? And they said well, I think you mail us a check. You think? Mail you a check?
You think?
I'm not. There's no online portal where I can pay. There's no means of paying when I'm there for Busar's office. Of course, I'm asking for all the things that I would ask of a community college.
Right.
So I think what needs to happen is that this, the BOCES Center needs to be like a community college or act like it. But instead, we kind of have our current community college for the area just kind of expanding continuously. But it's not really for adults, and it's not for vocational training.
Sure.
So unless you integrate it all together, which could be a plus, but I don't know.
Indeed. Okay, well, that was a great intro. Let's get into the video itself now.
Warning: hard times are coming, when we'll be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now, can see through our fear-stricken society and its obsessive technologies to other ways of being, and even imagine real grounds for hope. We'll need writers who can remember freedom, poets, visionaries, realists of a larger reality. That's Ursula K. Le Guin. I nailed it, honestly.
Yeah, nailed it. Ursula, thank you.
I am wrong. You are wrong. We are wrong. I am wrong. He is wrong. She is wrong. They are wrong.
So they've done a number of episodes covering library socialism. So they have an episode for each of the concepts.
Oh, cool.
So for a more in-depth, hour-long deep dive into each of these concepts.
Oh, man, I love those guys. They are so knowledgeable.
This is apparently their brainchild. So they've spent the last 3 or 4 years developing this out of Bookchin thought.
That's so cool.
Seriously. Wrong.
This episode of Seriously Wrong is brought to you by Wrong Boys Revolutionary Doulas.
Push, 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 push. Congratulations, it's an ecological and democratic society.
Thank you, Wrong Boys. That was such a painless process. All thanks to your incredible doula services. You're welcome.
Our pleasure. Hi, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Sean.
And we're revolutionary doulas, making the process of birthing a new world as smooth and safe as possible for everybody.
Look, we know a lot of revolutions are unsafe births. They can be painful, uncomfortable, they can have bloodshed, they can even be violent.
Obviously, birth doesn't always go the way you want, but we work as hard as we can to make sure that it goes as well as possible.
You know, a lot of shitty doulas say, oh, birth, it's inherently violent. The mother has to bleed and cry. There needs to be tearing. This is just hard-nosed realism, you know? Sometimes it's historically necessary for the mother to die during childbirth. These shitty doulas, I mean, that's just crappy.
Yeah, it's a horrible thing to say.
And it's a little misogynistic, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, to be frank, sometimes in birth there is some
I
tearing.
didn't pre-watch
and it can
this,
be
by the way,
painful,
so I'm
but,
not sure
you shouldn't
when they get
uphold
actually to the
tearing. You shouldn't act
Q&A,
like doulas
but-
are naive
When they get past the extended metaphor here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
for
I'm
trying to
enjoying
make birth as painless as
Okay,
possible.
that's fine.
You shouldn't be
time.
indifferent to whether the mother lives or dies.
And sure, in the event of a traumatic revolutionary birth, we should have a plan to heal after that. But some people actually lionize tearing. They lionize the suffering as necessary and righteous, the suffering particularly of women.
Yeah, and that's just bad doula skills. Makes people not want to give revolutionary birth.
Now, we've been a doula for many years, and it's just not the case that birth trauma can never be avoided. We should always do everything we can to prevent discomfort, pain, and damage, and bring that beautiful society into being.
We do safe births here, from fetus, pregnant with a new world in our hearts, to labor and birth.
And to child rearing too, you know. Our new society has to grow up big and healthy and strong.
Yeah, so we'll train you on breathing exercises, squatting, stretching, nutritional and sleep health. All of these things can help lead to a safe birth. And a healthy and safe birth means a healthy and safe society.
You can hold our hand as you give birth to this new world. You can do our breathing exercises, and we're going to tell you, you're doing such a great job. We are so proud of you.
You're doing great.
We believe in you.
Wrong Boys Revolutionary Doula Services. All the support you need for a safe birth.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Seriously Wrong podcast. This is our first bonus episode of season 10.
It's a transition Q&A part 2. We've been excited to make this one ever since the last. We left you on a nice cliffhanger. We're going to be talking about elections. Going to be talking about insurrections this episode.
I
Yeah,
think
those
as the
questions we didn't
teaser,
get
this
to
is
last-
just. I just realized. I think as the teaser, this is just the first 10 minutes of their normal podcast.
Oh, okay.
So it's not.
So that
When
part
I
was
when
the
I
teaser.
when
that
I send
little
this to you,
skit.
I was under the assumption that it was like a clip.
Yeah,
That was
it was just the
like a
opening
good
sketch
clip of
from
their
it.
show, but their clips are just their sketches, and the rest of their show is just this
Okay.
unseparated conversation.
Okay.
It's hard to pin down point.
Do you want to move on to a different one? Do you want to find?
Yeah,
episode
since
itself?
I've sent you other things.
Yep. All right.
I put in focus group RFK Jr. Let's see what we got.
Fourth turning. Is that the one you're looking for?
Oh yeah, we could do that.
Okay.
Oh yeah, because I also finished the book for the most part,
Okay.
so I can also give you my ending thoughts as well as the actual thesis and conclusion of the whole book.
Cool.
Which did I? Anyway, yeah. So just a little the historians he's going to quote or bring up the book of, they're actually, it's like a focus, it's a team effort with marketers who came up with the word millennial, as well as a bunch of other terms, and some pseudo like historians. But I think it was more that the fourth turning was by pseudo historians, and it is, at least by the profession, considered to be pseudo history.
Yeah, I would say
The
so
pseudo historical theory.
at this point.
And well, but it's, when you type in like historical cycles or something, this is what will come up. It's very much mainstreamed.
I mean, sure, there are cycles, but they're not as neat as especially like the one that's
No.
the weak times create
They're
soft men
yes.
create bad times.
Something that the long 20th century kind of points out is that there are cycles, but it's like a pendulum that they change in length, they change in makeup, and they are evolutionary cycles.
Sure.
So there's something that's repeating, but it's also changing each time it repeats, like evolution.
Yep.
and most other organic processes as well.
Yeah, I mean, so far this country has not oscillated back into slavery, so
Right.
we got that going for us.
It's not a one-to-one swing.
Yeah.
And each swing of the pendulum, though, he's talking about cycles of accumulation,
Oh, okay.
which is a good materialist rubric for like it's the economy that underlies culture, and culture underlies politics. If you're going to say that politics is downstream from culture, culture is downstream from the economy is downstream from material circumstance, I guess. But it also points out that the phrase mode of production is something that's very much of Marx's time, because it was Marx figuring out how the UK was mastering capitalism, right? How was capitalism being done in the UK? It was through this formation of a mode of production. Anyway, I can get to that later.
Cool.
But it was just one of those tidbits I really like.
I did not realize that was popularized by Marx. Yeah.
Mode of production. Yeah.
This spirited man.
I just assumed it was something that was kind of in the ether. At least.
No, I think it comes from him and M.
No, I mean, I believe you. I was not aware of that.
Been expecting this crisis. Maybe not a global pandemic per se, but he knew something was coming.
Reads edges. It's good.
For a decade, this spirited man had been reading books, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. His brother, a spirited man himself, told him to read this book, The Fourth Turning. This book turned out to be this spirited man's favorite kind of book, a mind blower. A book about how and when history repeats itself. And this is what the
Anglo-American
book
history.
said.
Yep.
History repeats itself in 80-year blocks called saeculum, but we'll just call them history blocks. Not exactly 80 years. This is history, not math, but roughly the span of a human lifetime. Maybe 80 to 90 years.
A very rich.
Within these
person's
80-year
lifetime.
history
Yeah.
blocks,
Depending on
we
what
have
part of
4
history you're in.
turnings of around 20 years each. We usually call them generations. This book calls them turnings. Turnings are sort of like seasons, like spring, summer, fall, winter. Throughout our history, we've had these 80-year blocks, and the 80-year blocks have been remarkably similar to each other. We're in one now. The first turning, the first season, is a high, an upbeat era. The second turning is an awakening, a passionate era. The third turning is an unraveling, a downcast era. And the fourth turning, well, sorry, but fourth turnings suck. The fourth turning is a crisis, an era of upheaval.
So my first thought about like the implications of this is mentioning that it's based on the length of time of like a standard old age person,
Mhm.
or that 20 years define a generation, which is a marketing thing to do. And it's something that historians don't really do.
Right.
If you're going to see things through cultural lenses, like these turnings are almost based on the culture at the time, because there are people that really put like certain things first, right? Like to say that we're in a culture war, not a political one, and that cultures change generation to generation, or that because the thing about like cultural trends is that they're actually in 15-year cycles or blocks. At least that's like it's 15-year blocks, not 10. We try to find culture by decade,
Yeah.
and that's just doesn't work. You actually have all these culture critics actually say, these early aughts are like the 90s trying to die. Like, or you could say that it's a 15-year block that's 91 to 2006. That would be the conclusion you draw if you're being materialist about it, maybe. but then you could also see how like these 15-year blocks will overlap with certain historical events as well as market trends. So it's like whether or not an industry is making money, that affects the things they produce. So that's where thinking like us maybe, or just materialist or Marxist, it's like it's the economy, stupid. It's like if you want to understand culture, you need to understand capitalism, or it's capitalist culture, right? So this analysis of historical cycles is sort of based in like a cultural analysis first, and it's done by two marketers, or maybe it's a historian and a marketeer, but in all the critiques I've read, and this is just via Wikipedia article, because I don't know in a book that's just about rebuting this. But yeah, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Let's move on.
We're in a fourth turning right now. So let's take a look at our seculum, our history block, the history block that we're in the crisis of right now. Our high began after our World War II victory. By our, we mean America's. These are America's history blocks and turnings. During a high, the getting is good. We had the most even distribution of wealth during our high. You could work at a gas station and afford to buy a house. This high is the period that the MAGA hats refer to. We got Hank Williams and Elvis and Little Richard and the birth of rock and roll. We launched monkeys and men into space. This is when the Mustangs and Corvettes first came out. Our high ended with the assassination of John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. The high is not a high for everyone, of course. America still had a segregated South. Homosexuality was illegal and considered a mental disorder.
The end of this high was the end of legal segregation, so there's something to be said so far for this.
Especially depending on what your standards are for what how you define a span of time.
Right.
Is it simply by the existence of a certain institution? It's like we got to be careful not to be circular about it, where we pick things. We pick where the blocks begin and end,
right,
based on what matters to us. Using JFK's assassination as this dividing point between a high and an awakening, I'm pretty sure people didn't awaken just because the president was assassinated.
No.
It's been done before.
It seems to me, I don't know, I didn't live through it, but it just seems to me, looking back, that assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. was probably a more significant event nationwide and shaping the character of the nation, because it's what led to the Voting Rights Act being passed. So I don't know.
But it's like, is the Voting Rights Act really like this nation changing event, or is it simply part of a larger trend of 15 years of all reforms? Because I could easily say, like, with all the books I was reading in college and going from there, my dividing line between epochs in American history is 1972, when we went off the gold standard, when the bank said, no, we're not going to loan the public any more money, and you have to start basically. It's when our boom ended, and thus everything becomes restoring America or getting back to that, even though we're evolving in a completely different direction since then. We're in a different cycle of accumulation. There was one that's based on commodities, and then it switches to one based in finance. And okay. I see that as more understandable than just saying, oh my God, and it's like someone was killed and this fried everybody's mind. That's not really how societies work.
Yeah.
At least that's not in a way that makes sense, because otherwise you're kind of left with the malleability of people's minds, right? That people really shift so easily because of a certain event that happens, or that 9/11 was so formative in the minds, in the psychosis, and it's using psychoanalysis to explain the decisions of nations and what in the world, and that
True, but I mean, every revolution has a flashpoint, and it's not always a super significant thing. It can just be the final straw that brings everyone together. But I mean, I guess it seems like
but there's the time but leading up to it,
yeah,
and then there'll be the time that's after it, and these two things taken together kind of make more of a history block
yeah.
than that's maybe around an event. Like this is maybe this is just the way I
That's
was
fair too.
instructed in middle school, where we would when we talk about a war, it's usually war based, but it's like, what are the causes of the war, and then what are the effects, and you're going to write an essay on that. And so, like, instead of just seeing things as just being a series of events with like this cause area, because the cause of a war would always be the previous 15 years of it from it, and then the effects would be the 15 years after it, or something like that. So I was seeing those patterns in just the years and the dates, but also just in the patterns of, like, you can't just say there's the war era that takes up this decade, like the Civil War,
Right.
because there's all the things before and after it. You can't just say it's the civil rights era of reform, because there was the 10 years of organizing before in the 50s, and then there's the 10 years of activism in the 70s. It's disillusion. It's it was a bell curve of sorts. So you can't just focus on that, because then you miss how it happened and what happened to it afterwards. Because I mean, otherwise it's this big gap in knowledge where the history textbooks stop in 1980, basically. At least the textbooks I grew up with. And I was lucky if they had a last few pages talking about globalization, basically.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's dig more into this theory.
A high is a period of conformity. The age of nonconformity and of social justice begins during the Awakening, our passionate era. During the Awakening, we had Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, acid, Vietnam protests and Vietnam itself, the Women's Liberation Movement, Stonewall and the Gay Rights Movement, great movies, great music. This is when the first Macintosh computer came out. The Awakening is a time of increasing individualism. This second turning, this awakening, ended with the re-election of Ronald Reagan in 1984.
A small chunk of American society.
Right.
So there's a sort of zoom in when based on the bias of the whoever's doing the looking. And I think that's what makes this pseudo history, is that it's just, you're really just looking at a part and then extrapolating. I just see this big extrapolation that happens. And this writer here, he's reacting to it like very recently. He's being really smart about it by putting caveats about, like, this is just, he mentions this is just American and Anglo history, or, well, obviously the high wasn't for everybody, and those are the people who were revolting in the Awakening era. So it's like, you're really not talking about the whole then, are you? You're talking about what matters now, like what matters to us now, not so what matters then. Like, you can't, but I guess maybe that's just an historical trope that you cannot judge things while you're in it. You have to wait before you can make an assessment.
Hard to assess history that's happening right now.
But I feel like the long 20th centuries, Giovanni's, I'll just use Giovanni as the author's name. Giovanni's take is, I feel like I could at least predict the next 50 years a lot better than Wolfaltist. Wolfaltist should read this book if he reads.
Okay.
Because he sketches out some scenarios for like how things will go. Though he's not, being an older economist, he doesn't factor in peak oil. So there's sort of a different or climate change, but it's almost like even though these can be part of the inciting incident of the crisis, or they're happening during our economic crisis, they're not. They can almost be treated as separate. Like I mean, most books treat them as the same. I'm starting to. I'm a little on the fence now about like. I feel like capitalism will shift. I mean, it's already internalized all of the extra costs that climate change is putting on things. It doesn't slow it down at all. It doesn't disrupt the logic at all. It internalizes it. It only internalizes more and becomes more complex, more powerful. And the pattern, I'm skipping ahead, but
No.
I'll repeat it a few times because I find it fascinating. With each accumulation cycle from the beginning of capitalism, each of the powers that manage or the hegemon of global capitalism, they are the hegemon because they successfully internalized a process that the past hegemon didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Or that if in order to have another accumulation cycle, this thing had to be internalized. So for the Dutch, it was protection costs. Other capitalists before in the Renaissance, they didn't have their own armies or navies. Venice, as a state capitalist enterprise, did, but Genoa, which was the actual capitalist hegemon, they were the bankers of all the Europeans for like 100 years. They did not have their own military. They did not have their own navy. They're not known for being conquerors. They partnered with the Iberians to do the conquering for them. They externalized this cost. And it bit them in the ass when they couldn't defend their own merchant navies in the Mediterranean. Or whatever. So anyway, the Dutch internalized protection costs. They had their own, they were a state, they did state making, they had their own military and diplomacy and all that. And the Navy. The merchant navy and the Dutch East India Company was part of the government, and it was a military force. So anyway, and the British, being the next hegemon, internalized production costs. So that's what I mean by mode of production. They made production their mode of capitalism. The way they did capitalism was to internalize production costs. No longer, like the Dutch still had to buy everything from other people.
Mm-hmm.
The English said, no, we're going to own everybody who makes things that we want. And that's how we're internalizing that cost. We no longer have to pay for Swedish iron, Baltic timber, as the Dutch did.
So it's like vertical integration in a company, right? So
exactly.
Every stage.
Exactly. So what did we do as the next hegemon in order to, capitalism was sure to end. Imperialism was its height and its decadence, and all the socialist writers and revolutionaries of the first half of the 20th century were like, this is the end of capitalism. It can't sustain. It's the end. It can't. No possible. It can't. This system can't go on. Yeah, the British system couldn't go on. It had to internalize something else. In America's case, it was exchange, mode of exchange. The markets, and particularly the dollar system, having that fractional reserve banking currency allowed us to dominate world markets by controlling them. So it wasn't about controlling the production, though we did a lot of that through our expansion. We integrated and internalized the cost of exchange. Now that system is degrading, and we're in the terminal crisis. We're no longer the world hegemon, really. A hegemon in military power, yes. In economic power, no. That's now in East Asia. So he projects that the next thing to be internalized will be reproductive costs. That's the thing that capitalism hasn't internalized, but for the last cycle has been struggling to, or at least from below, that's what we're demanding as a society. In order for the society to continue, it must internalize reproduction costs. That could be via UBI. That could be via just a public provisioning of the four main services. Because what is reproductive costs? Healthcare, education, entertainment to some extent, housing. What was the other 5? Utilities, of course. So energy,
Food, transportation.
and food, transportation. Right.
Yeah.
These are reproductive costs that the market, rather capital never paid for it before, but it can no longer be profitable until those things are covered and provided. So
That's
somehow
very real,
capital,
especially with
capitalism can only continue if it does this. And if we suspect that it will, if we're going to be realist about it, realist about it, but that capitalism will become a new system that internalizes all the things that makes it socialist ideals a reality. But for the sake, but all of these things, the public provisioning, the nationalization, the mass transit, will be for the sake of the next expansion of capital. Because it's through those monopolies of production, of just economic cycle, that we get surpluses and the expansions of tech, art, and quality of life, which the capitalist will rightfully point out is, but they're wrong in that they skip over that it's because of the monopoly. You're only able to make that kind of surplus with monopoly. Right. And so it's like, to end capitalism is to end interstate competition. And so as the pendulum swings back and forth, it gets shorter and shorter with each cycle. And because with each cycle, the system gets bigger, more powerful, and more complex, to the point where, and it's going from city state to global state. So it's like after enough cycles, it'll get to a point where it's just a global super state that's powerful enough to end interstate competition. And that will be a state of post-capitalism. But it's not through revolution. It is the evolutionary process that was started in 1407.
That's an interesting way to think of it. I don't think I've considered that.
But it'll make you feel small, right? But
oh, of course.
But us and all the preceding generations were always acting on things. So to put it into the history blocks of like, these 20 years will be like this and these 20 years are like that. Like, I feel like you're fitting a oblong hole peg in a circle hole. Because if you apply this, could this be applied to the Soviet Union or Russia? Could this be applied to China? What's their high period? And they're going to have an awakening and an unraveling and a crisis. And it's like the 80-year cycle. But it's like, it's never really purely 80 years. So they have to fudge the numbers. And if the more you have to do that, the more you're like trying to make reality fit your belief. Yeah. So the other way around, where you simply say the reality is that cycles are never consistent. They are evolving. And thus will be different every time.
I guess in very broad strokes, pretty much every civilization does go through these periods. It's just the idea that you can predict it and that it's these neat little blocks.
Yeah. Meh. There's not enough, like, you can collect all the data you want, the lengths of things, and you can get a median and a mean, which is what that's what this is based on. But that's sort of the extrapolation of like, well, what does that do for us? You're trying to find the one answer, but that's not how social science should be, or it doesn't make sense if, or you just kind of get stuck in a belief that can't handle going up against reality.
Indeed. All right, well, let's continue on.
Yeah.
Things get messy during the third turning, during the unraveling. We got the fall of Soviet communism and the beginning of the Russian gangster state, The greatest musicians of the time sang about violence and decay in their deteriorating cities. The LA riots, OJ, the bombing of Bosnia, and the Columbine high school shootings on the same day. September 11th, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Our unraveling ended with the financial crisis of 2008. A fascinating fact about this book is that it was written during the last third turning, published in 1997. But the book predicts now, what's happening now in this fourth turning. And what's happening now is right on schedule. "80 years ago, in the last fourth turning, America had her Great Depression, then World War II. 80 years before that, the Civil War. 80 years before that, the Revolutionary War. Now it's our turn
More or less.
to save
all
the country."
Yeah.
Especially if you
So
see
where do you
crises
fit into-
as being wars,
Right.
War is the ultimate expression of crisis.
I mean, I guess it's a
But-
crisis. It's an upheaval of an order and the establishment of a new order. But, yeah, plenty of other types of crisis.
But here's the thing about Giovanni's cycle is that when the capitalist world order is in crisis, that crisis, or even though, I mean, hell, there's the, yeah, no, when the crisis hits, it's 30 years long. Like the 30 Years War, the for the British, it was the Napoleonic Wars.
Oh, geez.
That wasn't
We were in
totally 30
Afghanistan
years,
almost
but-
30 years. So, yeah.
But no. World wars.
Oh, okay.
World wars that involve everyone in the system. Truly, like all, not all against all, but like global conflicts that, because when the Dutch crisis was one of the wars of Austrian succession, so it was like one of the on the surface level, it's just another France and Britain, clash. But it was also the first war where like trade power was more important than land. But that was when they were in their, he calls it a signal crisis.
Hmm.
And then the terminal crisis is like the 30-year conflict where maybe it doesn't involve the hegemon, or the next hegemon. Oh, no, sorry, the last one. Because the Dutch weren't really fighting the Revolutionary Wars, but they were certainly involved and taken down a peg as the UK basically took the overseas empire. That's how you know it was over for the Dutch hegemony. And we expect the same thing, but it won't really be that way because we have the military power. But like the 30-year crisis for the UK was the World Wars, which was more actually over 40 years, right? So it's not so neat and clean, but
Right.
But you take the World Wars together, which is why I kind of get annoyed at mentions of World War III. Like, look, maybe it's because we still have some World War II vets still alive, but I think enough time's passed that the next world conflict is not to be clustered or included with the two from the 20th century. It is now a different century.
Yeah.
Right?
It seems unlikely now. I mean, there's so many people that seem to want Russia to be the spearhead of the next world war, but I just don't see it.
No, it's East Asia versus the West in a way, but and not just China, East Asia, but
I can't imagine them getting themselves embroiled in a war. Like, over what? Like,
well, it's a matter of there's the so much a contradiction, but the incongruity that military power and economic power are now in two different places, which has
Right.
never been the case. So either this is like three scenarios. America / the West. And by the way, these are the big ideas, okay? It doesn't like it ignores who need to be president, what kind of governing coalitions, just like, but there would be a Western-led project for the creation of a global superstate. And this global superstate would be the first real global empire. It would be the next kind of turning of going up the ladder, because political authority is moving away from the nation state. It can go up and it can go down. It can also do both at the same time. That's what the materialist dialectic's all about. But if it goes up, it's global nation state that ends interstate competition for the most part, and it's going to be America stays world police, but the world actually pays us in an actual like tribute system of sorts. But since as a Western-led project, it's like the UN is the world police with the stronger militaries funneling it and being paid by the member states for doing it. You could see it as protection racket.
Sure.
But there is a need for global policing in general, or global governance, right? Because otherwise, how do you enforce these UN resolutions? They should matter. They should mean something.
Right.
When we find Israel guilty of genocide, what is it? Is there a military coalition will need to be put together to stop them? Will China be the one to do that? Hard to say.
Bloody unlikely, but
and then will us America as Israel's true ally? Well, I'm not gonna say it's not gonna be about Israel. I don't think, but
I wouldn't think so either.
They'll reach a breaking point where this whole we keep the political pitch of politicians and leaders is that we can still stay on top. We can be both the military power and the economic power and dominate the world economically. Sorry, bro, but that ship sailed in 2001. Right? We lost hegemon status, and the project for a new American century was doomed to fail. In the same way that I feel Project 2025 is doomed to fail, as well as Agenda 21 and any other.
Well, I mean, Agenda 21, that was more just some wishful thinking best practices that conspiracy nuts like to get up in arms about. But yeah, I see what you're saying.
So is Plan 2025. It's best practices to fuck with the libs.
True.
Make them mad and take people's rights away.
Yeah, maybe a little more threat to that one because, yeah, you have an actor who doesn't really care about.
It can follow through, I suppose. Yeah. That can, but otherwise, my personal feeling is that the hysteria is it comes off as hysteria to me.
Yeah.
To make this the most important election of our lifetime.
Oh, it always is, isn't it?
Too much at stake to do anything outside of the Overton window.
Right.
Because stability is obviously maintainable. Well, the other, let's see, one of the other possibilities is, and by the way, both of these preclude that we're going to be less nationalist and accommodate the next rising hegemon, China or East Asia, or just accommodate the reality that the economic power in the world is there now. We have to be accommodationist and say, we're going to make a deal. If you want to keep being the hegemon, then you got to be nationalist, America first. And then that will create the global conflict. So but if we are also accommodating in a more like you can handle it and we don't need to be the military power, we'll have a world market system. So we'll be post-capitalist in a way that, as it is a communist-run country, that the Chinese economic power doesn't depend on a capitalist class. So a world market system that is based on mutual respect instead of military power.
Yeah.
And maintaining the peace.
That one seems most plausible to me because, I mean, they're already in the process of doing it with their Belt and Road Initiative and so forth.
Right, right. And we just have to accept our decline, or at least our, actually not decline, accept that we will be an equal among nations and not the global hegemon.
Right.
which includes the Western Europe too. But and then option 3 is global conflict, endless chaos. He calls it endless chaos. Oh, our call has a limit?
Yeah, I'm on the free call thing. We'll just have to reconnect the call when it goes.
Okay. Oh, that's what we do. Okay.
Sorry for the
All right.
inconvenience.
Restart. Sorry. Okay. So now I
Yeah.
gave the whole long 20th century spiel. Now we can talk.
Yeah. Now let's see what he actually says.
Go back to the video.
To all this, what's your role? It depends when you were born. Each generation, each cohort tends to embody a specific archetype. An archetype that will move the society towards the next high. Each generation's archetype is the characteristic that will define the generation in its prime, in midlife. The boomer archetype is the prophet. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs are boomers and prophets. Both predicted that one day everyone, not just big corporations and governments, would own a computer. Gates
Keep
even
in mind,
predicted
these
a
are the
crisis like
examples
COVID-19
that
5
the
years
book is using.
Yeah.
These are the examples the book is using. This isn't just the video maker here.
Oh, that's true. And this is a 1997 book when, man, they were
Yeah.
flying high. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Makes a little more sense.
Beforehand. The writers of this book are boomers and prophets. Gen X is the nomad generation. The quintessential Gen Xer, Elon Musk,
Gross.
builds things that move us from one place to another.
Except for he doesn't build anything. He just either pays other people to build it. Or...
Really bad example.
Yeah,
It's kind of weird
that
because
does
this
not
guy,
age well.
he didn't make this video that long ago.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's still
but
people
he's-
that view Musk that way, but maybe he's just looking
Yeah.
at the book and he's just like, however it presents
Yes.
it presents it. So
And they published addendums called like "Living in the Fourth Turning," kind of like the Kunstler book I'm reading, "Living in the Long Emergency,"
Mhm.
which he calls our terminal. America's terminal crisis is the long emergency to him. It's kind of, anyway,
Yeah, you still
I'll
may
rant
be
about
right
that
on
later.
that, but yeah.
Rockets, electric cars, hyperloops,
Even
nomadic
it's all people.
devices. But the millennials, raised during the unraveling, will emerge as the hero generation during this crisis. These are the Parkland High students, the frontline hospital workers, and Malala Yousafzai. The book says
But she's not
millennials
American.
will be the World War
That's
II
what confuses
heroes.
me. This is supposed to describe American
Just
culture and
America's
history,
turn.
and he uses a non-American. I mean, you can say we're in a global society, a global culture, but then this has to, like, this turnings has to apply to every country and the
Sure.
whole world. And you're in a lot of problems if you start doing that. Nothing makes sense.
Yeah.
Nothing fits.
Maybe it's just
Because-
that she has been influential and inspirational to a lot of Americans.
Or to this guy, yeah.
Or to this guy in particular. Yeah.
A hero. It's like a hero. That the hero archetype, who fits that bill to me?
I mean, he could have just
And-
as easily
and-
picked Greta Thunberg, but I guess that's probably Gen Z, so we'll probably see.
A little true.
Of our history block.
You could pick a pop star. He was talking about musicians before.
We don't
Pop
know what
musicians.
Gen Z will do, but they will be an artist generation. From them will emerge the next Bill Withers, Toni Morrison, or Bob Dylan, all born during the last crisis, all from an artist generation. The history block before ours
They did nothing else.
ended with World War
That's it.
II and
That's the
began with the
archetype,
Civil
dude.
War, 80 years prior. The history block before that ended with the Civil War and began with the end of the Revolutionary War, 80 years prior. Every 80 years or so, something big comes along and changes everything. And now, we're at the end of our history block, right in the middle of our crisis.
Great.
We are in the process of changing our world again. The authors of The Fourth Turning tell us that these crises are like forest fires. Unpleasant, but necessary, they clear the woods for new growth. As we work towards our next high, this crisis will tilt the playing field away from the old and towards the young, they tell us. But the victory is not guaranteed. We will, each of us, need to rise to the occasion during this crisis. We will need to develop and fortify our virtues as we pursue a greener pasture.
Man Here with a Thousand Faces, a fun read, but not a lot of actual scholarly work to be found.
Oh, good to know.
Our Western society was built to foster the potential of each individual within it. The aggregate effort of individuals
That's a
keeps it
stretch.
going.
Me, actually.
What's that?
I said I think that's a stretch. That statement. This whoever he's quoting, which I think he's quoting someone, but
The spirited man wonders, what is his role? What verse must he contribute to help extinguish the crisis? This spirited man is told that his cohort, Gen X, is the repair generation, the one stuck with fixing the messes and cleaning up the debris left by others. Cleaning, fixing, repair. This particular spirited man, from the last pre-digital generation, the last of the analogs, just happens to have a particular knack for repair and for fixing.
the shop channel.
Perhaps his nomad generation is tasked with ferrying his society from one saculum, from one history block, to another. But
Seems
where
like
does
whoever
he
you
start?
are, you can center yourself.
It kind of does. What else? I mean, the way that this laid out, it kind of reminds me of like astrology, where like you're told you're something, and then if you think really hard about it, you can fit yourself into
Generations.
it.
Like generations are like star signs.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm a Zer,
Yeah.
and that means
Yeah.
I'm
Zennial or whatever.
cantankerous, and I can't get along with boomers.
Right.
Okay, boomer.
But like, I mean, Gen Z is going to be reaching the height of their power as the boomers finally fade out, and probably reaching a really bad tipping point in the climate crisis. So in a way, they will be the fixers, as he says, because they'll be in the best position to do something. But
I think too many of them will be stuck doing whatever floats their boat.
yeah,
And because, and by the way, this is just an impression I'm getting from Counselor's book I'm reading right now. Much easier read than Long 20th Century, because it's basically just it's not even a diverse of subjects, but basically he has made friends with people on his site. You know, his site has forums where a lot of interesting characters show up. And so he basically took the time the project for the book was to go out and visit them because they're doing interesting prepper / people that he feels are preparing themselves for the long emergency, or they're already in that state because they do have something of diverse backgrounds, but they're all sort of doing a very similar things, which is sort of there's versions of homesteading. You know, Kretzler's a homesteader kind of guy, and it's what he's doing in Saratoga County, or is he in Clinton County? What? Yeah, he's in Clinton County.
Yeah.
But you get my gist. Right. But it's interesting that like the chapters are actually a little repetitive because he's covered basically 3 people kind of doing rural farming. He interviewed one person who's urban, and he spent a chapter interviewing someone in basically the Rust Belt County of Connecticut, one of them, and where everything's dead. So it's like he's a guy who's a jack of all trades. He runs he's okay. Get this. The thing about him is that he's a white nationalist to the core, and he is very much an alt-righter. But he is for mass transit, and he runs a taxi company in this county, but he sees it as providing privately, I guess, but providing mass transit. So, but he's he calls it, I'm like, I want to be the mass transit guy of the county, and I could be the public planner of it because he would want to be, because he does have ideas about connecting this county, rural county, to where the jobs are on the coast and what have you,
Mm-hmm.
or to Boston. It's kind of equidistant. And but it's a little wild because he is a white nationalist who believes all the terrible, horrible things, but he thinks like, oh, why do they hate me? Oh, I'm just seeing what I'm seeing. And I just, oh yeah, and he's an interesting character, of course.
Yeah.
Bad home life. He
Mhm.
was like a binge drinker at age 12.
Oh,
So, you know,
not
he's
off to a good
not,
start.
yeah, it's gonna be some damage
So,
there.
so is Kunstler just fascinated by this guy? Is he blind to the white nationalism? Because he has
No,
come
he's
off that
not.
way.
He actually has to he has to stop the chapter to a halt sometimes to kind of talk down his audience, which are basically kind of center left people.
Yeah.
That this is purely for journalistic intent to understand, and it doesn't do well to ignore these types of people because they are out there. But of course, and he doesn't what's it called? Write a pushback or any obfuscation. He's like, I'm just gonna lay out his worldview the way he tells it and nothing else. Just to point out, the kind of life he's trying to lead. It's weird because he says misogynistic things, but Kunstler writes that he worked for his wife for a bit of time. His wife is a lawyer, and he was working for her as a paralegal for 2 years.
Mhm.
Because something that all of his subjects have in common is that they they changed jobs every 3 or 4 years. Like, they've not kept going with anything. But it's anyway, bundles of contradictions, and I think they're all Gen X age. They're all Gen Xers, so it's definitely his audience, I guess. So that's when I think of Gen Xers, I think of Kunstler as his audience. Of we're just out, like, we're just gonna help ourselves and try to model for other people, maybe, or we'll be a small business owner, and we have that spirit of independence and work drive, and not like those other lazy, and all those cheap. They're not all like, some are more hippie-ish, but also not, because they're still just self-centered.
Yeah.
Sort of like hippies are actually really mean people pretending to be nice, and punks are really nice people pretending to be mean.
I've seen that going around. Yeah, that's funny and very true. Oh my goodness. Having been to a lot of hippie
Eternal
festivals
truth
in the
there.
past, there's a lot of very, very selfish people.
You step on their toes real easily.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And their couch is like, your energy's just
It's
not
toxic.
good.
Yeah, I just don't want any negativity in my life, man. So yeah.
All right, let's
There's-
okay. Oh,
Yeah, let's finish it up. We got like a minute. Not even.
Well, the zip line at the community center playground has been broken for over a year. And this particular spirited man happens to have the tools to fix it.
After 2028, we're back in the next cycle of accumulation. It's just another cycle, presidential cycle away.
Warning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not optimistic about that, because it makes more sense that we're not coming up on a high. We're coming up onto a 30-year crisis of global capitalism.
Yeah, that's kind of what kept bugging me at the back of my mind. It's like, I feel like we're in the unraveling right now. We're getting to the point where
the crisis.
Yeah, we're getting to the point where people don't ever see a future of owning a home. Where, we're starting to get this greedflation that's really been pervasive, and no one's doing anything about it.
This is how people felt in 1977. Inflation was massive, and it seemed like the government or the capital didn't know what to do about it, and they struggled to figure that out for 15 years. And it wasn't until the 90s that basically they stabilized, and we could have our own cycle of accumulation again.
Oh,
but it
call's-
was
Hold on, call's about to end,
Yeah.
so
all right. So
we'll just
pick up this
end
thought.
it and
We'll do another video.
yeah, and then do another video. All right. All right, so we'll just wait for Dan to get that email again and hop back in. Now let's take a look at the video playlist here, because this one that he had sent me is part of his playlist. Let's see what else might be interesting tonight. If we have anything. All right, sounds like he's back.
Yep.
Oh, how do I have you in two places? Oh, it's just the join notice. Gotcha. Never mind. So yeah, I was just looking at your playlist there. Was there any other videos in that playlist that you wanted to look at moving forward?
That's the three. Oh, I put that through list. Why don't you scroll down to the bottom? Oh yeah, there was the Thomas Sowell video.
Oh, which is that?
The bottom one I haven't actually watched. That would be Quick Run Drive. I actually don't know the content of it. But the Thomas Sowell was like a let's deconstruct the right-wing economist.
Okay.
Do you know Thomas Sowell?
I do. I'm not seeing the video you're referencing here. Is this presidential debates?
No.
By Free and Equal, or
Which one do you mean?
So the bottom.
Well, here I got the Breaking Points RFK focus group.
Okay. Do you want to just put that into this playlist and then we can pull it up more easily? Instead of having to switch screens and making it awkward.
And I can also see what else. Yeah, I didn't really add anything else because since we, had so much to catch up on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I still have that. Oh yeah, there's the one dime video. I'll remove the Dutch one. Why do I have that in 3 lefts? Let's see. We'll cover that.
There's 2 unavailable videos too, so I don't know how it looks on your end, but
I don't see those. Weird.
Oh, okay.
Oh wait, how about I look at yours? Scroll down.
Yeah, future socialism. Does eco-socialism actually work? Bosch tries.
Yeah, you could click on any of those. Whatever floats your boat.
What do you think about that Andrew Millicent one at the end there? How to turn your neighborhood into a village. I'm familiar with his work. I actually like the stuff he does. He's a permaculturist. What do you think?
We have the fewest number of communities.
Did I lose you?
Gathering places of all first world nations in the neighborhoods of the United States, where we don't live in villages, we live in a development mechanism propelled by the interests of developers and bankers to make money off of creating housing. It's very different than a village that is created by villagers as a way of helping people to help themselves to meet their own needs. So the primary lesson of this model is to juxtapose where we live and the patterns that we're living in with a new understanding of how people live in villages with very high rates of participation and very high indicators of public health.
So first impression. Oh, I'm not getting your audio for some reason.
Oh, maybe I just.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Right, new call means I needed to reset.
Oh, gotcha. So first impression, this looks like kind of hipster, we got a lot of money, so we're just going to do all our fantasy projects, but not really actually change anything. Just we'll have some walking paths in between our suburban lots that still require sewer hookups and everything.
If I stayed in the profession, this would be the career I could best hope for.
Yeah,
like
I want
to work. Huh? I want to work for this guy.
Yeah.
Or someone like
I mean, it'd be fun. It'd be fun projects for sure.
But yeah, it is based on who can afford it. But of course, like that's where a lot of other mechanisms need to be built first. Once there's an infrastructure of non-capitalist lending, and then that can fund and capitalize co-op housing, then there will be the entities to pay professionals to design those projects. It's just architects are dependent on the clients that can afford to pay their bills.
True enough.
So that's sort of the limitation. I was like, okay, I don't really just want a career. I want to be a change agent of society. And any job I have is simply a means of that funding or paying for things. And so in that way, my work goals, career goals even, is just to actually do as little work as possible for the most pay. I'm being a capitalist about when I'm working within capitalism, use capitalist logic. But for everything else, want to be anti-capitalist. So, which cool, including community spaces in group design projects, but that isn't. But he's kind of left with any one of us to basically be an advocate for these things. But in the end, who provides it? If you want to build community, you need to pay for property and start an info shop or a coffee shop or something like that, or an art gallery. And otherwise, you have to have a business to basically fund the rent if you're even just going to break even. But you have to pay rent for these spaces.
Right.
And otherwise, they have to be city spaces, but then the city will have hours and rules, and they're not. They can be places of community, but there will be limitations, like my library system, which now has basically an 8 o'clock stop time.
Yeah, well, most of the libraries around me aren't even open on Mondays anymore. That's been a policy for, at least the past 5 years. So very limited hours in general.
God damn it!
Yeah.
The fact that our libraries are actually open most days, they're just inconsistent with. They don't close at the same time. Some of the branches will close at 6, and others will stay open until 8. And I suppose that's mostly like there's just a trickle of people those hours. But I mean, fuck, it's only because they're closed. I mean, I remember there was a few years where they were all really open till late, and I would hang out there and see a lot of people coming and going, and there was at least 20 people they had to check out before they closed. And that's also because maybe there would be more events, and so it got harder and harder to book time at the library for events, especially when you have to stay within the hour.
Right. I mean, you got to ask, what is a public good? Is it just something that is for people at peak times when it's most efficient to staff it and stuff like that? Or is it something that is supposed to be available on demand to whoever wants it, or if nobody wants it, but it's still there in case someone wants it?
But for resource allocation, they become economic questions, and thus the market becomes the better arbiter of these decision making.
Right.
So how do we get around that, or how do we provide goods that are in fact accessible? And so we get into decommodification and all that stuff, but it's just sort of like it's where I go into state capitalist territory, because it's like the only way to really make this happen is with more state capitalism, not marketeering or the opposite, which is where some post-leftists go.
All right, well, let's continue. Let's see what he says.
When places are designed by other people than the people who live there, and then the people who live there are told that they are powerless, that is a broken design. So what we're doing today is engaging a typical circumstance, a model that has been designed within a great imposed gridded landscape that is so familiar to people who live in North America. We're engaging it with a villager's sensibility, and we're asking ourselves, how can we unlock the creativity which is resident here all the time, and yet people don't tend to even speak to each other? It looks completely normal, and yet at the same time, we don't quite tend to understand what we're seeing. Let's look at the facts. All of the houses tend to address the street across a space where all across the country people are told that they have no power. They have no ability to take the street and make it into a space that actually brings people together. That's a big issue. Also, though they might have back doors, back porches, back decks, and maybe even gardens, their separation is enforced by lines that say this is yours and this is mine.
He's
I'm
talking
actually
about
not
current
decrying the
conditions, not his project.
Right.
It took
Right.
me a moment to realize that for some reason.
Yeah.
He was models representing his methodology, or no, he was showing models based on the status quo.
Where I assume he's going with this is to have more commons in between houses where there's shared space and stuff, which is all well and good.
Pattern language stuff.
And yeah, and that can be good for that kind of small village sort of a feel. But it also is I mean, look at the world he's looking at. It's a world where the street is only utilitarian. It's only for vehicles to travel on to the houses. So there's very little chance that you're going to interact with a neighbor from the front. Whereas if they were in a city, in row houses or something like that, it still might be nice to have a commons in between all the houses, but your city life is coming from the street. That's your best chance for
it's sort of a in this archer school, maybe I picked up on this, but it's like having separate purposes for different streets. You have a street that's for transportation, and then you have a street for living in.
Yeah.
So they're not really streets anymore. They're walkways and maybe something like that. But it's more like that shared common garden, field, park between houses, which is one of the pattern language things. And addressing the street means being closer to the road, in a way. Party, like business in the front, party in the back, kind of thing. Which is sort of, if you're going to design in a suburban context, that's what his projects are going to look like.
Yeah.
A ring of houses with a common space in the middle, because you can't make that work while interacting with the actual infrastructure. So it's like alleyways are sort of a social street, so they can accommodate bikes and such. So it's sort of like I put alleyways between my projects, or if we do a subdivision, there's going to be alleyways between half of the houses with roads circling around.
That makes sense.
Idea that people have separate interests. It's just that all across the country, quite unlike thousands upon thousands of years of village design, there's been no effort made to create something that they would steward in common. Retrofitting a neighborhood block like this to make it work like a village again consists of several different design patterns that characterize the most lovely and robust villages in the world. The first one being whether or not there's a great village commons where everyone knows that they belong. Such a space tends to exist in a central location between where everyone lives, so they all have an equal access to it. In fact, this would tend to straddle property lines and be something that brought people together across those lines. But this is the first piece. This is the most important piece of the village, because it tells everyone that they're all part of a greater whole. Another one of the really significant design patterns that has to characterize a village is that when you come to the perimeter of the village, that there are portals, you might call them gateways or entrances, that celebrate your arrival and also your passage out of the village. They can be a lovely, arch with some grapes or kiwis arching overhead, something that celebrates the fact that you're entering the perimeter, and it says welcome to you, and it also invites you to return as you leave. When people live in the colonial grid like we do,
I just had one thought about that with the portals. I do like that idea. I think it should be integrated more into all neighborhood design, because one of the worst things about living in the suburbs is there's just no edge to it. It's just, I don't know how to even describe it. You're just in this morass, basically. So you don't know when you're going from one place to another. Sometimes you might have that you're in the so-and-so neighborhood, but that's your only indication that you're in a different place. So it's hard to really develop unique character or have a sense that this is the place I live, and it encompasses these boundaries here.
What's usually missing is associations. In business improvement districts, bids, those are business associations, and they can pay for a larger sign that goes over a road, with city permission, or they work with the city to have specific signage and decorations on the light poles and city property,
right?
That gives a area character, and the bid does that, or even just plants that have matching colors or just a pattern, a rhythm of things that can exist if everything is individual property, which can be its own fun, where everyone's putting out their own plants, so you can have a pattern language of diversity. But that's usually not what happens. People are minimizing their costs. That means not putting anything out. So it's almost like there needs to be a requirement that they do, which is where HOAs come in, or business equivalent. But it's usually about sharing costs. Bid can pay for people to shovel the walks so that you actually have the walk shoveled. If it's person by person, there's never going to be any consistency of whether the snow is cleared on sidewalks. The city of my city has chosen the path of punishment and policing to put a fine on those who don't shovel their walks. Wow. But guess what? So many people get exemptions, or the properties are vacant, so there's no one there to fine, or there's no one worth fining. It's just they're just not. I'm assuming tickets are not given out, and so you have whole blocks or whole sections of block or whatever where if it snows bad, you can't get around, and people in wheelchairs or the elderly, they're walking in the street.
Yep.
Or it's with much difficulty that I walk around, even on county roads. I was walking up a county road. It was an overpass of the highway, and there was no snow cleared. So the snow was hard, and I had to climb, scuttle over it. And this is with traffic, 60 mile per hour traffic.
Uh-huh.
It was a real bitch. I took a picture, so I'll share that with the right person eventually. But anyway, I'm getting around to associations. The only way to kind of to do this kind of thing, not the only way, but the way I envision it happening, if you're going to have, you have to have a certain level of cooperation between property owners on a block to make any of these things happen, to do them in the first place. You could have an association just to hire someone to mow or to garden maintenance. You can pool your resources and hire one person one day of the week. Or hire the local kids to coordinate that instead of it being every man for himself. But I kind of wish we had all of our sidewalks cleared. But it's but we're all not going to buy our own snow blower or mower, but one cul-de-sac could just pay for one.
Right.
They would share it.
That makes so much
sense. But that requires some level of cooperation. So obviously fostering that culture of cooperation with people around a block who are sticking around, though. So it can't be, some renters are around for good and want to be there as long as possible, but situation changes and they don't have to move. Something they would never contemplate normally. So you kind of need, let's say, among houses on a street that are all property owners, and they're not there's no landlords involved or what's it called, property owners as distance.
Oh, absentee
But
landlords, yeah.
absentee landlord, absenteeism. But you need all these property owners to associate, to collaborate, and then they can put up those arches or plant joint garden, take down the fences, and say we're gonna have a big shared backyard. We did a little bit of this between my father and some neighbors, but it didn't last for long. One of the people kind of got miffed and put up a fence, and so kind of ruined it. Having at least a 3 wide backyard. Which is great because these backyards are otherwise just 15 feet wide and 30 feet long. But if you put 3 together, you actually have enough room for parties, barbecues, and kids to play in. Otherwise, this has to be designed in from the top down because we don't have, at least on the super local level, a bottom up culture because it's assumed it requires everyone to be a homeowner. And so you can have middle-class neighborhoods where some of this happens. But you'll have working or middle or precarious, and no one can afford to even think about, I'm here for as long as possible, and I'm willing to invest time and energy or put in my bet. But sometimes it's just a matter of proposing it. So if I were as active in my neighborhood association, I would want to get people to pay a membership, and then we would have a budget to do things. But we probably want a list of projects and say we're going to do these 5 things, and we're not going to care about or we got the city permits, but we need to raise this much money, and we can raise that if everyone's a member for this long. Or maybe it shouldn't just be about projects that cost a lump sum. It should just be about we want to pay a part-timer to or some of the street kids to clean and paint things.
Yeah, that makes sense on a lot of levels. Just do things collectively. You all save money and hassle, and it reduces neighbor to neighbor conflict because everyone's agreeing to it. So yeah, that's a great idea.
But around me in the semi-hood, there's people who just want to keep themselves and are pretty self-centered or boomers. It's obviously a diversity of people, and that's sort of the thing where you kind of pine for some homogeneity, people who want to or comfortable collaborating with each other. There has to be some kind of thing in common. And I'm not talking race, I'm talking culture, maybe class, position.
Sure. Right. If only we all had our basic needs guaranteed, then we would have a common platform.
Yes, that would make a lot of this possible. And that's where, even if it's still capitalism in 100 years, it's going to be so much better version of capitalism in the same way that ours is much, much better than the 1 century ago.
Who knows?
We talk like it hasn't changed at all, but it is different. That's why we have these different schools of thought and critical theory, I think.
Sure.
Maybe.
All right, well, let's continue on because it's getting late and we want to finish this up.
The pathways tend to be long and straight and flat. Americans have this challenge around obesity, largely because their environments don't engage them to want to get out and move around. If your environment is repetitious and monotonous, it's not inviting to us to want to come outside and move around.
I don't see it as just a matter of aesthetic preference. It's people are very eager to move around the suburbs. It's just not nice experience. I'm when I say nice, I mean it's not safe. It's not comfortable. It's not a matter of aesthetic enticement. Because
sure, there probably is a small component of aesthetics, but it's just spaces are too large. So
I would walk around, and I would walk way more than I do, if it weren't for I see it as this intrinsic hassle of crossing avenues with high volume traffic.
That too.
The more of those I have to cross, the less I want to go someplace, whether it's on bike or foot. Even getting to certain bus stops, it's just I don't want to do these walkings or jog around I stopped. Like I just jog in one line back and forth because if I did any kind of cycle, I'd have to clear roads, and I just don't want to. Or I don't know. I'm being really conceited because it's not that bad, but it's bad enough that
I mean, you're taking a risk. I understand that for sure.
Maybe it's just turning 35, but like walks that I would consider to be like no problem, no distance at all. It's like, that's 3 blocks. I don't know if I want to do that. Except I will. I walked a shitload yesterday. I walked to work and back. Or I took the bus back, but I walked to work and then I walked home to look for Eclipse glasses. Found that they weren't there, so I take the bus back to work.
Yep. All right. Well, continuing on.
Environment, the experience of moving around is kind of almost all the same, and you're relying on the differences of architecture to make it more interesting. But when you don't even have places where people are outside interacting and gathering, like you would in a good Spanish or Italian village, then why get off the couch? Why even go outside?
I mean, Kunstler has talked about this a lot when he wrote like the geography of nowhere.
The geography of nowhere.
Yeah. So there, I think there is some truth to this. But yeah, I think what you're saying carries more weight as the safety and convenience of things.
It's just odd, like what you end up blaming, like to blame car culture, which we can do obviously, but it's like but I see that as a symptom of something larger,
right?
Like it's still like everything is really just a symptom of some other thing, or it's an expression. What is it an expression of? The logic of capitalism, if when you get down to it. But why does the logic of capitalism express itself in car culture? In our expansion of commodity production was with cars and roads and not with our industrial cities, or the last cycle's commodity production. We were deindustrializing already. And especially after 72, switching to finance, which every other hegemon did. But the fact that our hegemony is essentially just 80 years so far, and that we hit our signal crisis. I mean, it just shows that the cycles are getting shorter, even if the crisis and its resolvement also maybe takes longer. The crises aren't shorter, although unless you're really fine-grained on current events and thinking that when we have a recession that's 3 years, that was our crisis point. But then if it doesn't feel that way, because 5 years later there'll be another crisis,
right?
So it's either we're in a long emergency where every year is a crisis, and there's no way to distinguish between a high and a low, or you look at the big picture and say that no, actually, like we were at a high for the last 80 years, even when it seemed like we were in the pits, or we have these 15-year crises, but it's been really stable. Like Britain had way more recessions than we ever did. We just have the big depression at the end of the day, or it's just sort of, I know what you're saying. Yeah, the fact that Japan is in a 30-year recession and that our recessions are just like a year at most.
Year or two.
That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
That our recessions don't last long.
Definitely does not.
They're not big crises because the market just bounced right back. It just bounces right back.
We also have our fingers in the most pies around the world, so we can just extract a little more from the littlest guys.
Control of markets, but China is slowly clawing that away. Like we've internalized the cost of markets, and so has the Chinese. They've learned from us. So now the next step is who internalizes the cost of reproduction. And maybe it's the social democracies, the Chinese, that are most able to do this. I mean,
wouldn't be surprised.
They don't do it very well. I think the internal reporting in China is that actually the social welfare state is actually pretty sparse.
Is it really? Okay.
I don't know. I hear both. I hear that
me too. I have a hard
good,
time parsing out,
or it's at least up to French levels, maybe. But then actually lying flat, and the 4B movement and other East Asian youth are like, no, actually the social safety net sucks. We're struggling, we're precariat as much as anybody, and we hate it, so we're just chugging along. Or like maybe that they have to struggle, they have to fight for what's due them, which is reproductive costs. Because otherwise, populations are going to keep going down. It needs to be internalized, or the population decline is a real thing. Because as far as like what's keeping men and women from being more civil and having better relationships, pretty sure it's the material conditions that are the main impediment. The fact that you can't easily buy a house or have property or security and community and pay for these things. These are all rents, and they have to be internalized if anyone's going to be able to do business. Because every time I see a small business fail, it's because reproductive costs weren't part of it. They weren't taken care of. It's all externalized, and I guess that could have been done as long as we had traditional institutions like marriage, family, churches, very much churches. Churches covered a lot of reproductive costs.
True enough.
Don't got those anymore.
Not to the same
we've
degree.
evolved out of it, so we need to evolve.
New
Those
system,
costs
yeah.
need to be part of the system.
All right.
You're not going to have a place, a destination. So what we're seeing now are pathways that link people from the gateways where they arrive in their block to the common center. So everyone is linked. Notice that these lines are not flat and straight, but they actually curve and they adjust as people are moving between things. And the pathway can be established through something as simple as wood chips. There's many different ways to create a sense of a path. Another thing to think about is connecting to people across public space. Typically in the USA, we're told that we don't have any power in the public right-of-way. I can assure you in Portland, Oregon, that is no longer the case. We now have the ability to transform street intersections into public squares for free, beginning by painting the streets. We can install benches and kiosks for free on our own authority in a collaborative set of agreements that we've created. Before 1920, when the federal government decided that streets were only for cars, for all the millennia of human existence, streets had multiple different kinds of uses that were enacted in that space every single day. And maybe the biggest and most important of all were the combined birthday parties of all the children that would live in an area of what we call a neighborhood. They would come out into the streets, and that was the space where children would play, and they would be safe.
These are definitely neighborhoods where everybody owns their house.
Yes.
So there's definitely like those collaboration agreements, like HOAs. You could look into that. I know in the history of Portland, there are like actual neighborhood organizations that were like actually had governing power and budgets. But that was only like in the 70s and early 80s. It was for like a quick 10 years and it was rolled back.
Right.
Really sucks.
Yeah. But I mean, in these neighborhoods he's talking about, because people own their own houses, it kind of indicates that they all are at least a certain level of material comfort where they can, afford to pool a little bit. Like he says, it costs nothing to do this project.
Yeah, I don't know what he means by free.
Yeah, right.
I think he's referring to that the city doesn't charge them for the privilege of putting a bench down.
Gotcha.
That's my guess.
That could be. Yeah, that's probably is what he means. Not how to think about it.
Because he doesn't mean the materials are free.
Right.
He doesn't mean the paint for the street isn't free.
Right.
I mean, now my first move would be to put big rocks in the street to slow people down.
There you go. Some wound nerf going on. You familiar with that concept? Wound nerf.
What? Wound nerf.
Wound nerf.
No.
It's basically just that. You put trees and other obstructions in the street. People got to swerve around it. Traffic calming.
Yeah, there was this viral like high-speed chase in a European area, looked like, but went on for 6 minutes, and I'm like, man, if those roads weren't so clean and smooth and straight, like this guy would not be able to run for the police this long, nor would he be going so fast, so dangerously. And the fact that all the intersections were roundabouts meant that he could just kind of cut and like confuse the route even more, you know, and not go into like a side crash, which would eventually happen. So it's kind of interesting to think about it. But yeah, but someone hit one of the bollards on one of the main streets in Albany, and the bollard didn't break, but it did upheave like the sidewalk.
Oh yeah.
So now that's a big freaking crack. But it also makes me think of like when the city would solve problems by being cheap. So like complaints about potholes are on the citizen side, but for the city, potholes are a great deterrent to speeding. Potholes are the obstructions that you're referring to. People have to slow down. They have to control their speed if they're going to go over a street with potholes in it.
Oh man.
So there's an incentive for the city to not fill potholes because people like to move over the street, people speed and hit people. Now, conversely, the city did this too long, and it made the city undesirable to invest in because of the roads being the shape they were in. So, like, there must be a happy medium where, like, you just fill enough of the potholes or something, or maybe you fill them halfway.
Yeah.
Fill them halfway.
Well, I mean, also with blacktop, how long do those patches tend to last? Like, I tend to see a blacktop patch, and a year or two later, it's sunken back in. So.
Yeah, exactly. No, our streets are very old, so they've all done that. The ones that have been completely rehabbed, they're in better shape, but they still got too many heavy vehicles, and it's a losing battle until we get the mass transit, and so even if it's like mass taxi systems, you know, which never worked publicly, but it was interesting that this guy, but it's through Medicaid. Well, I mean, in rural and even in Albany, taxi services are really just they're paid through Medicare to shuttle people to their medical appointments.
It's like dial a ride sort of a thing.
And and that's the only service that taxis have anymore, unless a poor family is making a grocery trip and they use a taxi.
Maybe once in a while a guy gets a ride home from the bar if he just really doesn't want to risk it. But yeah.
Maybe. I mean, the people that drunk are like not drinking in the city.
True.
In our urban area, they're walking home / making trouble. Okay, back to the video.
Back to the video.
It's missing. Trees should have tree houses in them. Do you live in a neighborhood without a swing within a block of where every child lives? In my world, I would have a sitting bench at least within 50 feet of where everyone lives. So we have some examples of the kinds of things that would bring people together as a village, like a community market, a tool sharing library, sacred spaces, greenhouses, things like that, benches everywhere all around the block. Why isn't there an art studio? Why isn't there a cafe? Why isn't there a place for a music venue? Why do you have to go to a music festival or a place like Burning Man in order to find that kind of integration? And then you come home, save your money to want to go away again. Why don't we engage in this place and bring this rich program of the village back into our lives? So just put down orange circles designating water.
That ownership has to be bought. You have to buy that ownership.
Part, yeah.
I think people going to music fest and whatever, they're they're renters, they're nomads, but tech nomads anyway.
Sure.
But yeah, the ownership's a component. Like actually, I'm thinking about this on Orange Street in my neighborhood, Sheridan Hollow. It's not a rich neighborhood, it's not middle class, but enough people own the houses along. And by the way, they can own them because this is the cheapest part of town. It's the most blighted. But we have rows of Habitat for Humanity row houses being put in. They have been putting them in for a while now, and they're really repetitive as far as architecture goes. But people can decorate the front, in various ways. They put ornaments on the stoop. They're little small stoops. And I see some more character, and there's people hang out in some of the houses with people who've lived there for 30 years. They put out benches, and I saw a lumpen guy basically passed out on one of them, and I'm like, some owners would hate that, this bum on their bench, but it's like it's why the bench is there. So he can just take a nap in the sun.
Yeah.
And the same goes for any other area. So it's in the blighted areas that everyone can kind of own. It's either that or landlord absentee people buy them all up. So, but of course, most of the houses need renovation or rehab or they're vacant lots.
Yeah.
So, but the way housing prices are going, I almost feel like it might be worth. It would take longer, but buying a lot and building my own house, and it would probably cost less than paying the $300,000, or the $200,000 for the houses that are around.
I've been thinking about that too. Yeah. It's just...
Because some of the lots can be, if they're vacant, they could just be a few thousand, a few hundred,
right?
If it's county owned, and I could build a $100,000 house there,
and have a really nice brand new house. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, or something, or maybe, or it could be the kind of thing where I build it sections at a time.
Sure,
kind of thing.
Why not?
One half, and then the courtyard goes in the middle, and then the second half,
There
and
you
then
go.
like a thing that connects them, kind of thing. It's dreams. It's all dreams at the moment.
Yeah, for myself as well.
Otherwise, I had a dream where I was like, I fell into like a lawn that was so muddy, it was like quicksand, but really it was like I fell down and it was just water with grass. It was like grass water.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, I'm climbing out of it. I'm like, ew. It's sort of like melting snow in this muddy ground and cleaning a garage. Anyway, it was weird because it was kind of like the Inception, where like I had one dream and then like I woke up to a different dream.
Oh wow!
Mostly because like some stress dreams are, I'm driving, but I'm struggling to stay awake.
Ooh,
because there's usually the stress of like I'm driving, but I'm not in control. Like I can't move my body. I can't like move fast enough, and I'm like trying to drive. Sort of how I stress out when I'm driving, but I feel like I'm out of control. But like I literally like my body is asleep, literally,
So
but
won't do what you tell it to.
I feel that my body's asleep,
right?
But it's also a feeling I have when I'm at work sometimes, where I'm like struggling to stay awake. So it's just that, but then translated into dream form.
Sure.
Feelings. Oh yeah, another thing was another thing that I'm used to doing, which is I'm looking for a piece of paper and I'm going through where I think it is, and I keep having to go through it over and over again. I was doing that, but the context was I was in a music concert.
Oh no!
And I was looking for the next like piece of music, and I'm like, oh god damn it, we can't start without like me finding it, or I'm not going to be part of the band and I'm missing out, and it's like all because I can't like find the. Why wasn't the piece of music just given to me? Like, why am I digging for it? And this is how I feel about certain pieces of information or resources.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It just bugs you. Like, you know where it's supposed to be. You just can't quite pull it up.
And I was doing that with my Eclipse glasses. So I finish up the talk with what I did for the Eclipse, which in Albany, it was like 97%. So we don't have the full Corona. But I wasn't able to make plans with some others to go somewhere else.
Oh, that's too bad. Was it at least clear out? Like,
no, but it wasn't. It was it covered the sun completely for a bit of it, but then it was clear enough that I could enjoy it.
Yeah. Here in Minnesota, it was overcast the entire day, so I didn't even notice a change in light. And we're pretty far off of where the curve
barely.
So we got like a very partial eclipse supposedly, but I didn't notice a difference.
It certainly made the shadows more high contrast, as
that's cool.
Someone noted. I wasn't really looking at the shadows actually, but I was out on the Skyway, and it was actually a lot more local people than I surmised. It's really the kind of event where I could even spot people I don't want to interact with, and I hate, but I also see people I do.
That's how you know you're in a real community, when you've actually gotten down to the people you're trying to avoid out in public.
There's a bit of Small Albany can be affected, especially if it was because it was such a super local event. It wasn't like a festival that people who don't live in Albany would go to. So that's usually where I run into people I know.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's continue on here.
Catchment cisterns on the back corner of everyone's house because we want to catch water. So the reason we're having these cisterns happen is because we're going to put in a common water course that is yet another form of commons that will bring people's lives together. And all of their rooftops will be like hills and valleys where rain comes down from the high places and flows down to the low places. Except with these cisterns, we're going to intercept that water so that we can collect it and use it and then release it again, letting it eventually get back into the landscape so that it recharges the water table. I hope everyone is actually thrilled when you consider, as you lay down these water courses, that every time a pathway intersects with a water course, it becomes an opportunity for a bridge. Imagine walking curving pathways through an abundant landscape, punctuated by bridges over water as you simply walk from your house to your friends, as opposed to having to go out your front door, walk a straight line, turn a 90-degree angle in order to come in through another front door just to visit someone.
I would at least have it go up from the ground.
There you go. Rise up.
Okay, so now I'm going to lay down some ponds. What if there were ponds on your block that were fed by the runoff from your rooftops, so that at the top of your water course there was actually a place with a fountain where ducks would sometimes land and frogs and dragonflies loved to dwell. And as the water was flowing from that pond down toward the center, your gathering place would also have bodies of water along the edge, and perhaps those could reflect light at the end of the day as the sun was setting. And these are the kinds of things that villagers actually create for their own aesthetic legacy to leave to the future generations. Like, this is what Americans are missing out on when we just think of our homes as commodities that we liquidate, cash out, and move on from to somewhere that we hope will be better. When you're considering an urban agriculture strategy, some of the most important pieces are going to be perennial systems, oftentimes in the form of food forests. You're also going to be, at the same time as you're thinking about that layer, you're probably going to be thinking about supporting native species, and then also annual agriculture that tends to require more sunlight, tomatoes and basil and artichokes, eggplant, corn. The abundance that is possible in places where we've just thought that we're going to grow lawns that we scarcely use becomes impossibly exciting. If we treat this side of the model as south, then I'm going to be placing these representations of annual gardens in light green on the south-facing available open spaces. I'm also going to be thinking of where the light is coming down both in the summertime and in the wintertime, because in the wintertime we're going to have much less available light. Where would those spots still be available where we could actually grow anything in the form of, say, a winter garden? So I'm going to locate these in open spaces in a neighborhood where people work. No one, typically across the country, has ever looked at the sun, the direction of the sun, as it rises and as it sweeps across the landscape and as it goes down over the horizon at the end of the day, to consider how sunlight actually falls upon the space. And I'm not just talking about passive solar gain or photovoltaic solar panels or solar hot water. I'm talking about the whole sensibility around spaces and places that you'll find in villages across the world made by indigenous people. So say some friends here don't necessarily like to see each other all that often. One of the things you can consider is, rather than having a fence, you could actually have a living edge with something like what we like to call a fedge or a food hedge. These can go kind of all over the place depending on the species that you're planting. So these food forests can freaking go everywhere. Another layer in the urban environment is animal husbandry. People love animals. Kids really thrive around animals.
There's definitely
And
the
learning how to
what's
take
of
responsibility, taking care of
The
animals.
what now?
Definitely the what's of eco village design. The how is, well, something to figure out.
Right.
Maybe
Yeah,
he
like
has
these are all
experience in that.
individually great ideas, and
Yeah.
he's applying permaculture to more than just growing food, so that's nice to see. But yeah, it's the how. You're right. The how we get.
You need that contained, like the square. I mean, he's using as a model, but it's the square block, which is very rare in suburbia. And if you have an urban grid, it's not going to be like, it's rare that's just a square like that. You usually have a long rectangle, and you can have that shared space, but it's not always that conducive to. Or actually, I mean, my block could be. But yeah, we just need enough of the houses to be compatible owners. And we could take all of our fences down, though a lot of people plant stuff along fences. So like you remove the fence, but then you almost have to rip up the gardens that people had as well. That's just a consideration.
Definitely.
But like in my backyard, we have two edges are just big hedges. So it's like they're more of an impediment than the fences are. Because for years they've been falling apart. But then, of course, the tree came down and basically crushed the back hedge. So that's going to be kaput. So at least that side of the yard is going to open up, I guess. Anyway, back to the bennies.
Yeah. We'll finish up what we can. We only got 5 minutes left here, so.
Animals is a great way to grow up a kid. Just to mention some of the potential animal species that can easily coexist with people, even in the confines of a block like this. Piglets, goats, rabbits, chickens, ducks, other kinds of fowl. And that's just to get started. You can actually have bees as well in an urban environment. Now, when it comes to talking about energy, what we like to say is that before you start calculating how to create an alternative energy system, first you engage strategies that reduce your load, that reduce your need. And so one of the most popular things that we've been doing on our block is actually to paint rooftops with reflective colors so that we immediately reduce our energy load for cooling by creating reflective surfaces. So you might have a south-facing greenhouse where you concentrate heat, and then you might have a reflective roof. You could do this all over the block. Another strategy related to energy is the idea of installing a green roof. So on a slope and on a structural system that can handle an installation of an eco roof, you could actually decide to create a living, respirating surface like a green roof.
How does that make electricity?
Imagine that every single
I
house.
think he's just talking about for cooling purposes. This
Oh, for cooling,
reduces
yeah.
the need for electricity.
He was still talking about reducing load. I thought reducing load was strategy 1, and strategy 2 was like
the green roof, yeah.
micro gen.
All right. Let's see what else we're looking at here.
Probably just wrap up.
I think we get the gist of the video. We might as well just wrap up at this point.
Eco villages are cool. I want to be one.
Yeah, right.
I think this one is one in Portland. It's like a converted motel. That's why it's like a longer building. So I guess he was involved with that. Cool. Yeah. I want to know. I wanted to plan how to do one in my city, and I can't even fathom like what it would. Well, I guess the guy who's kind of getting there slowly is the guy I worked with, but I don't like. But he did buy a lot of vacant lots, so he's got urban agriculture going. No live animals though. And then the next phase was buying houses around on that block. So he has the whole block, or as much of it as possible. And then he can kind of make an eco village out of it. But it's all under the rubric of a nonprofit doing community service. And I think that's not the right model for eco villages. Certainly redevelopment in that way.
Right.
I think it needs to be under something that's more actually integrated in the market economy, or at least is from it, and not trying to be something aside it or outside of it. Because otherwise it's not really not just seen as, but I don't think it embodies legitimacy to say that anyone could do this. You don't have to be the right person with the right style, the right ideas, or because no matter what people's fuddy-duddy beliefs, like anyone can buy a house. You know, they all the systems and the infrastructure and the rules are there. Whether it's how long it takes depends on the market or what kind of house you're trying to get. I met a couple, I think they had spent a whole year trying to find a house, and because every time even when they get in, right, as soon as it's listed, they've already got 5 offers, and one of them already has all the cash, and they're not even to the open house.
BlackRock, so.
It's not even the open house, but maybe they're looking out in the suburbs. So, but
we ran into the same problem. We'd find a really great deal, and there'd be offers well above asking immediately.
Yeah.
Most of them would be, companies, not even individuals wanting to live in them. So.
But this is why I really need to be prepared for when I buy a house, because the ones that I can afford or want to pay that much are the rehabs or something that needs work.
Yeah.
And but those are the ones that are listed for a year or longer, and it's like, well, I guess no one's fighting over this,
right?
And there's probably good reasons, but it's like, look, I'm willing to put down 150 and another 50 later if it means putting in fresh, new, energy efficient shit. Or by rehabbing it, I can put in the things that would make it an eco home or passive home that I wouldn't be able to if I bought it, and I basically need to rehab it to get it and make it more energy efficient. Or I have to be stuck with a house that was good enough 20 years ago, like the one I'm in now, basically, where we've made small improvements, but it's still very far from being energy efficient, or or being off gas or anything like that. There's all these things that can be thought out with the right equipment, and done. But yeah, anyway, something to think about long term, I suppose, and it is going to be long term because my mother likes me living here, and I suppose for my finances, I like living here. I'll have all that money I need, I suppose, if I go another year or two here.
That's awesome.
And because I have my friend, one of my buddies, is going to move in because he's getting evicted this month. Yeah, it's something that happens to him, mostly because he always has terrible taste in roommates.
That's unfortunate.
Or because he has to help somebody out, but then they're like a deadbeat of some kind.
That sucks.
But the thing was, he was subletting he was the one. It was his lease, so he went to court yesterday, and so he got a little bit of a reprieve, and he got 22 days to get out. Yeah.
Jeez, that sucks though. Well, it's good he has a place to go though.
He's got me as a fallback.
That's good. All right. Well, had another great time chatting with you tonight, Dan. Thanks for being on, as always. Anything you want to plug or shout out on?
Too many things. Look at honk bands. Look at the Green Party. Jill Stein, her campaign is rolling. Every $20 can help get us towards better battle access and actually have advertising budget. I'm worried about recycling all the stuff from her last presidential run. I have a box of Jill 2016 merch, and I really would like to move it, but I'm afraid everyone's going to it would be a significant amount of work to retool it, or it won't be worth it, or nobody wants it anyway. But anyway, yes, it's something to think about in the summer. I guess the summer is when all will be possible.
Oh yes,
just like I said with April.
All right. Well, cool. Thanks again. And Do you want to do this every Tuesday now? Is this a weekly thing you
I
want
would
to do?
I'd be cool with that. Though it might be possible I would feel swamped and cancel.
Okay.
But
Well, we can
I
just
think
keep it every other.
if we keep it to the 2 hours, and start, late, like we usually do, that gives me wiggle room, and it's fine. Yeah, no, I'm cool doing this every week, and I'll find cool stuff to watch or
Cool.
interesting things.
Sounds good.
It would get me to do that.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
have a good one. See you next week then.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. That was Dan Platt of the Albany Green Party. You can check out his stuff. He has a very large archive of the podcast that he's done at 3lefts.news. So check out his stuff. It's really good. And that's going to do it for me tonight as well. Thank you all for joining. And I will see you this Sunday. Probably going to be doing more video game stuff. I just haven't been feeling up to getting back into the harder theory lately. But I'm sure that will pick up eventually. Settling into my new job as a social studies teacher. So that's been taking up a lot of my mental bandwidth. I haven't had as much time to think about the theory stuff. But as the summer rolls around and I transition into landscaping again, probably have more capacity for that. That's my hope right now anyway. But until Sunday, have a great week and see y'all.